The 2024 Philadelphia Eagles draft class just might be my favorite of all time. We're going to recap all 3 days coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on in, Eagles fans. I'm Louis DiBiase, co-host of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Eagles analyst also over at Bleacher Report. Same with my co-host Gino Camilleri, our scouting director. On today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, we recap as a whole, to me, what was a banger Philadelphia Eagles 2024 draft class. Plus, we zoom in deep on the day 3 selections, as Gino and I, of course, didn't have a weekend show, so we want to get into all those picks. Plus, the Eagles made a pretty solid signing after the draft. We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Guys, today's show is sponsored by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I've got a competitive side. It loves Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or on Google Play. And yeah, I mean, Gino, again, it's only on paper. There have been a lot of draft classes for the Eagles. There have been a lot of draft picks that I've loved on paper that have not come to fruition. Last year wasn't a class I was over the moon about, but I don't know from top to bottom when it comes to the combination of the positions I wanted, my guys they got for both of us, the athleticism here. There's just so much excitement about this draft class. I think Howie crushed it on paper through 3 days. It might be on paper my favorite draft class as a fan, as an analyst in their franchise's history since I've been alive.
Well, first things first, I can't believe it's over already. And
right, that too, man.
On to rookie mini camp, and we're going to be talking about getting ready for training camp soon enough. But to see Howie do Howie, like to see him be the best general manager in football.
But in a bizarro way, like to do everything he normally doesn't do.
And not only did he do everything that he usually doesn't do, which kind of proved us wrong, but at the same time, kind of proved everybody right that was saying they need secondary help. Boom. What do? Go and turn around and do that. At the same time, do they not have a lot of picks going into 2025? He accumulates a future 3, 4, and 5, was still able to walk away with close to 10 picks in this draft, Lou. And Jeff Stoutland gets multiple guys on the offensive line in day 3 without overdrafting them like we had been saying. You double dip at the wide receiver position.
Just felt like he was listening to our podcast. Yeah. Man. I feel so vindicated.
It felt awesome, though, because there was a moment when the Jeremiah Trotter thing happened where I kind of chuckled. And we were talking about it before the show where it's like, yeah, we hated the idea of drafting him in the second round, but at 155, it was too good to be true. And
round 5, yeah.
For that pick alone, even if Jeremiah Trotter doesn't play a down for the Philadelphia Eagles, the video of the phone call between Jeffrey Lurie, Trotter Sr., Trotter Jr.,
impossible to not tear up.
That's why I love this organization, folks. Like, I'm getting the chills just talking about it. Louis Riddick put out a tweet today that said, team building and collecting talent couldn't be more different. What the Philadelphia Eagles are doing, that's team building, man. Yeah. And they're doing it the right way. They're getting guys that fit the mold for Philadelphia Eagles football. And all of them, man, like Johnny Wilson, big people beat up little people in a Chip Kelly type of move, and Ainias Smith and what could be a potential late round Deshaun Jackson type of player. Like, who would you want to be the mentor to Ainias Smith and an all-time Eagles great? And now you have Jeff Stoutland, who has 2 massive guys on the interior that he can go and mold. And at the same time, you got 2 first-round talents in freaking Cooper DeJean.
That's the thing.
And Q and
Jay Laton, defensive backs in the first, and Jay Laton is such an awesome pick for the traits and like how he went back to what he normally does in round 3. I thought it was a great pick, but the fact that I was over the moon he got Quinyon Mitchell, didn't have to trade up on day 1, would have been happy with anything else he did the rest of the draft, even if he went lineman, like whatever, you got me my corner. He turns around and not only takes another defensive back on day 2, but he trades up for Cooper DeJean, getting, like you said, a guy that felt very similar to the Nolan Smith pick last year, where I said, I would have been okay with just that being the Eagles' only pick. I said last year I wanted Nolan Smith in the top 15. They got him and Jalen Carter. That's the same thing this year. Like, I didn't think they would have had a shot at Quinyon Mitchell without moving up. I thought it'd probably have to be just Cooper DeJean or just a trade up. The fact that 2 years in a row they got their cake and eating it too by getting 2 studs at the same positions is just unreal. And it's different styles, though. Quinyon's going to be that boundary long-term CB1, and Cooper DeJean's going to be your version of, I don't know, Kyle Hamilton, Brian Branch, where he's just moving everywhere. I mean, it's such an exciting potential group long-term.
And the little things that Howie said along the way as to why each of those picks meant a lot to them. I mean, look at the Jalix Hunt pick. He said he was arguably Vic Fangio's favorite player.
Makes sense. And he fits his defense to a T.
You're seeing the elements of guys like him and now Kellen Moore. I mean, look at the running back that you add, Lou.
Yep.
Kid out of Clemson. He's a lacrosse player. Open field demon. You see what Kellen Moore wants to do with this offense. You see that he wants to build a basketball team. You see on defense they want versatile players. Quinyon, he's going to be somebody that, he's going to be a boundary corner, but you don't think at times in the future when he's your number one, he's going to move inside and match up against potentially the CeeDee Lambs in this division and the Malik Neighbors in this division? Absolutely. You don't think at times when they need to match up against big tight ends and bigger running backs that Cooper DeJean and CGJ aren't going to be part of that entire formula that they have? It's a group effort. The scouts, the coaching staff, Howie Roseman, Jeffrey Lurie, they're all bought into this idea of what they want when it comes to the draft. Now, it's evident, Lou. Howie Roseman doesn't shy away from telling us what he wants. He wants guys that love football. He wants guys that can run, and he wants guys that can stay on the field. And what did he get with this draft class? He got exactly that.
And what made him, and you know, of course, what Howie is a lead at, there's so many things. And I think him showing that he can take corners early and he's willing to change his philosophy at any point, and he's so open-minded, that's part of what makes him great. It's part of why he can turn things around so fast, even when his team has a bad season to rebuild the roster. But, you even look at like all the trades he made on day 2 and day 3 is just another reason why he's so good at his job, because he maintains the flexibility of being able to be aggressive for the short term and maintaining long-term objectivity by always working the phones, right? Because he can always do both. Like, he never sacrifices one for the other, quality or quantity, because he trades to collect picks, then he uses those picks to be aggressive, then trades again. Like, the guy broke the record for the most draft day trades over the 3 days in NFL history with 8 of them. And you know the funniest part? He didn't make a trade on day 1, so it's almost like he's a junkie that had to get his fix, so he makes 8 of them the 2 days after. But again, it was a perfect balance of, he wasn't just trading every pick like the Rams. Like, he moves up in round 2, but then he moves down twice in round 3. Then he moves up in round 4, or moves down in round 4, then back up in round 5 to get Trotter. As you mentioned, he collects a 3rd next year, a 4th, a 5th. So he was being aggressive to get better prospects on the board this year, but then gets more picks so he can do that again next year. Like, he's just so good. Working the phones is such an instrumental part of his process and this team's overall. It's why since the Wentz trade, they've just had so much flexibility to do both and not sacrifice one thing for the other.
I walk away from this draft, Lou, looking at Howie Roseman as somebody who has learned so much over the last 15 years. And 2 key pieces that I want to point at. Getting the 2 guys in Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. He trusts his evaluators. If they trust the guy to be a first-round talent, to be a true game changer, he's going to get them. The Devontae Smiths, even the Jordan Davis going out and trying to get that guy, the Jalen Carters, he will go and get them. But at the same time, like you said, Lou, and like Howie Roseman has said, he's not smarter than every other general manager in football. He needs swings of the bat, and that's exactly what he did without giving up talent.
How did
the guys he got were unbelievable, and he got future picks. Like, you could go on.
How did you get
I don't get it. I don't get how you pick up the phone when he's calling you. Why do you?
I wouldn't answer.
I would never. I would put him on blocked, mute, whatever it is, and never pick up the phone if Howie Roseman is calling.
It shouldn't seem possible that you cannot do anything to get Quinyon Mitchell. You can trade up to get Cooper DeJean, to trade up to get Jeremiah Trotter. make 9 picks this year. Oh, and by the way, I collected 3 solid picks next year too. Like, that shouldn't be allowed. And yet he's just, again, this Geno, again, from that perspective, from the players they actually got, the positions, the value, this was, to me, again, on paper, a home run class.
And even the UDFAs, man, like, shout out to all the area scouts.
They got your guy Gabe Hall from Baylor.
They got a CGS guy coming into rookie camp. I mean, they're trying to just add all of this talent regardless. And even if it's after the draft, potentially going out and signing a former first-round pick, which we'll talk about later in the show, Howie's season doesn't sleep. To the point where if you look at the videos of him on day 3, there are bruises on both sides of this guy's face from working the phone so much. Hats off to him. Hats off to everybody in the room. A job well done. Now they get some time to go and relax a little bit before rookie minicamp. But there's still a lot to talk about from this draft, Lou. I mean,
sure.
You got guys like Will Shipley that we got to discuss.
A lot of process from day 3.
Your
6
boy
picks.
Johnny Wilson, man.
I
There's
know.
Tons of them.
We're going to get into that coming up next. The Eagles made 6 selections on day 3. How do they fit for the Eagles short-term and long-term? Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
As we roll on, this episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and the NHL. And Lou, I'm just going to say it. If you're not betting the Nuggets to potentially end LeBron's career as a Laker,
it's a gentleman's sweep.
Gentleman's sweep. Nikola Jokic and that team, dang, those boys can ball, Lou. And they got one of your favorite players, MPJ. I remember you loved this kid coming out of college.
Yep.
You could bet on his draft or props if you want to. You can bet on any prop for any sport, essentially. You can bet on slap shots, home runs, slam dunks. And right now, if you're a new customer, I'm going to guarantee you this. Thanks to our friends over at FanDuel. You're going to get $150 in bonus bets. Yes, $150, win or lose. If you win, hats off to you. If you lose, guess what? You're going to get $150 to go back in and bet on whatever you want. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook and the official sportsbook of the entire Locked On Podcast Network.
Today's Locked On Eagles is also brought to you by GameTime, which is an authorized ticket marketplace now of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the GameTime app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. GameTime takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. You can save up to 60% buying last minutes for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, everything you can think of through GameTime. Toggling the feature, of course, to view your seat is huge in the app before you buy, so you know you're getting a great view on top of the great price. GameTime has the lowest price guarantee, or they'll credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with GameTime. Download the app, create an account, use our code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create that account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Guys, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Got to turn down the volume because of all the shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The Eagles were churning on Saturday, Gino, day 3. They made 6 selections. They made, 5 trades, if I'm not mistaken, because they made 3 on day 2. They traded up in round 2 to get Cooper DeJean, traded down twice in the 3rd round. If not, I believe it was 2.
9?
He might have got to
9 trades.
It's 8 or 9. I know he broke the record, which is unbelievable. I'll have to go back and check. And still found a way to make 6 picks on Saturday. And there were so many guys that we've already, hit on a few of them already that we really liked for both sides of the ball. But let's go back to the Jeremiah Trotter thing real quick. You made a good point, and I totally agree. Yes, you don't change your board. You don't over-pick on a player just because of the story, just because his dad was a Philadelphia Eagle. I would not have liked a Jeremiah Trotter pick in round 2 or round 3 over Edgerrin Cooper or a Trevin Wallace or a Cedric Gray. But for round 5, he's a much better player than a round 5 evaluation. And for round 5, to get the story, though, it is a really cool part of this. Like, it's a huge part of sports and why you love it. To see Jeffrey Lurie getting choked up talking about his mom that, of course, passed away, we know, when he was a kid to cancer, and how he said, I've known you since you were like 3 or 4 years old. And you see videos of Jeremiah Trotter Jr. as a baby in Trotter's arms after they win the NFC title, and now this kid's going to be playing for the Eagles. Like, it's almost movie script material. It's such a neat part of this that it doesn't always happen. And I wanted it with Asante Samuel Jr. a few years ago for that kind of reason. This one's even more special because this is an all-time franchise great whose kid's coming home.
As unrealistic as the movie Draft Day is, this was as close to a Hollywood moment as you will ever get. And it was truly beautiful, man. And if you don't get choked up hearing Jeffrey Lurie talk about,
I can't even watch the video. I tear up every time.
I can't even talk about how much he truly that's football, man. Like, loving
Howie was getting choked up too, man. You could see it.
Oh yeah, I mean, even you could see all of those guys in that room. Yeah. Like, they truly understand what it means. And yeah, if you do it in the second round, like, that's some Sonny Weaver Jr. draft stuff, and definitely a reach. But to get it at 155, I mean, heck, I don't care if he didn't test. He played big level football for Clemson. You need that type of player. It's pick 155, and for the story alone, that's going to add so much more motivation for him want to succeed, and just that drive to be a driving force to potentially be in one of the next best defenses in football, like his dad was. And you don't think that's going to be a little chip on his shoulder? Like, for Junior is going to want to be a little better than Senior, which it's a lot to do, but that was a great moment.
It's not like this guy has, of course I have some concerns about his coverage ability and athleticism. It's why I didn't see him as a second round pick or even an early third rounder. But I think he's a floor player. He's got great instincts, great positioning. Like, his tackling is great. I think he's going to be a leader in this locker room if he becomes a starter. Like, a lot of green dot traits. I could see him overcoming some of these issues that he has, kind of like a TJ Edwards did. I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not banking on it. Like, I would still say Nakobe Dean and Devin White are likely the players that play the majority of snaps at this position this year. But I wouldn't be surprised if Trotter overcomes those deficiencies in athleticism and just still makes plays, because he's got a lot of those intangibles that, again, I don't normally love in this process. But again, for round 5, like, that's a really good player. I think that's a steal.
Howie Roseman said it in his post-draft press conference that I believe they got 5 Red Star players. And if you don't know what that means, in the draft process, each of the scouts, they're awarded 1 Red Star. And what a Red Star player is, they fit every single quality and check mark that the Philadelphia Eagles look for. Football leadership when it comes to football IQ, when it comes to work ethic in the weight room. I mean, everything you want in a true football player. And they got 5 of those guys. They truly put an emphasis on finding guys who love the sport of football. As crazy as it is, man, like, you have to love the drive and love the want to get better each and every day. And I loved what he said about the competitiveness for, like, Cooper DeJean and guys like Will Shipley, and them wanting to do well in the classroom because they wanted to kick everyone's rear end when it came to their grades. And I mean, heck, dude, like, you don't think a guy like Johnny Wilson is going to be competitive in that room? And I'm
so happy they got Johnny Wilson, man. I think on day 3, like, yes, there's some issues. Just bet on when you're in day 3, you go for the unicorns that have 1 or 2 crazy elite traits. Of course, they're not going to check all the boxes, but a guy that's 6'7" that can run a 4.52. And like Howie said, he's not your typical stiffer, tall receiver that's going to have to switch over to tight end. Like, Johnny Wilson is somebody that I don't know. I mean, look, they've tried this before with, like, undrafted players like Ifeanyi Moma. I remember back in the day, like Carlton Agudosi. The giant receiver experiment in Philly hasn't worked a lot, but I don't know, man. I've got some faith that this one could work. I'm so pumped they got Wilson.
They're really building a basketball team on offense.
Because Ainias Smith is the opposite. He's just a rack monster that's a little undersized at 5'9" that breaks tackles. You have everything at wide receiver 3.
They got arguably one of the smallest guys in the draft at the
breaks
wide receiver
tackles,
position.
though. The 7th most broken tackles of any receiver last year with 20.
Will Shipley is the one when it comes to injuries that's like an outlier to the bunch. But at the same time, when he is on the field, I think there is a big role for him. And with the added element of special teams, I think you can see a lot of that in these guys as well. And the offensive linemen that you get in Dylan McMahon, who played at NC State, and Trevor Keegan, who played at Michigan, those guys are both athletes. Trevor Keegan is a mauling type of guard who played multiple years at a high level for one of the best offensive lines. Dylan McMahon is a depth piece for you. And where did they get those guys, Lou? Day 3. That's what you needed to do. Yeah, the talk of getting Tylee Fuaga or Troy Futanu, that would have been awesome. But you didn't have to overdraft them. And you got what you needed on day 1. You got what you needed on day 2. And day 3, it was all about swings of the bat. And Howie Roseman, he stuck to finding athletes. That's what they want, man.
That's the perfect way to put it, Gino. The raw athletic score of almost all of these guys was over a 9. I mean, Johnny Wilson's was a 9.
Second highest average in the league.
Yeah, I mean, Dylan McMahon had one of the highest. I think he had the highest RAS of any lineman in this draft, or he was in the top 3, like a top tier athlete. Almost all of these guys were elite athletes that had college production too. So he's kind of combining what he used to go. He would go too far at times in college production, and then after that, it was too far in athleticism. Now I think he's struck a really good balance.
That's a great way to look at it, because it was a perfectly level draft, right? Yeah. You didn't force anything. The board kind of fell to you. You kind of had a little bit of fun with all of these trades, but at the same time, you didn't sacrifice giving up next year's picks or even giving up this year's picks. You found a way to have just as many picks next year as you did this year. When you went into, I think, day 1 of this draft with 6 picks going into 2025, and you walked out with now 9 selections in that draft. You went into this draft with what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 picks, and you went and walked away with 9. That's good business for Howie Roseman, man. And a pretty good UDFA haul as well, dude. Like some guys like Gabe Hall, who we had talked about on this show, the interior.
I really like Kendall Milton too, the Georgia running back.
Kendall Milton.
Yeah. The fact that he went undrafted, I'll take that too.
Listen to this one, Lou. This is Aneem Dankwa. He is the offensive lineman out of Howard. 99th percentile height at 6'8", 98th percentile arm length at 35.13 inches. I mean,
just give Stoutland again, like just figure it out. Like here is again another ball of clay.
That's why you don't have to draft him in the first or even second day, because you get guys. I mean,
this was
exactly Trevor Keegan, a national champion, on day 3 that played on a Joe Moore winning, or whatever the offensive line award is, Joe Moorhead award, on a line that was so good with so many guys getting drafted on the team that had the most selections in the class. Let Stout get those guys on day 3 and pound the table.
It was the right strategy, Gino, because again, you're not looking for an immediate tackle starter or even a guard right now with Tyler Steen being the guy at right guard. For what they needed for depth, this was, and again, it wasn't all calculated. How he even said the way the board fell was surprising, and so many tackles went. It kind of, forced their hand a little bit. But for what they needed this year for depth, like this was definitely the right approach. And I just can't believe he went so corner heavy. And of course, he got an edge, but he's taking linebackers and multiple receivers. And I like that you mentioned the basketball team style at wide receiver 3 right now, because while nobody's guaranteed to be a solid producer, you've got any kind of trait you want. The big boys in Devontae Parker and Johnny Wilson. You want the 4-3 speed guy. Well, we got Paris Campbell. You want the Rack King. We've got Ainias Smith. Like, at least a few of those guys are going to produce, I'd hope. It's a much better group than last year, I'd say.
The last emphasis that I want to put on what Howie Roseman focused on this draft weekend, arguably the 2 biggest weaknesses when it came to depth for this team. Secondary, and guys behind Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown. They brought in pass catchers. They brought in guys in the backfield. They brought in guys in the defensive secondary. And at the same time, they found depth at positions like offensive line where they're pretty top heavy. Same with the defensive line where Jalix Hunt, he really doesn't have to come in and produce year 1. He can sit behind that really good group, as Howie Roseman talked about. I'm excited. I can't wait to see these guys get on the field, man. It is a really good class. We'll see, obviously, in a couple of years how it plays out. But at a first glance, you filled a lot of needs. You made a lot of picks.
A lot of value,
2025, you got a lot of picks coming your way.
And Gino, again, as I mentioned, tackle didn't really fall their way early on in the draft, but Howie immediately addressed that with more depth, bringing in a former first-round pick on Sunday. We'll get into that coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. How's Jeff Stoutland going to use this guy? Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Today's episode of Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by Monopoly Go. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You already talked about that, but there's just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock, and there's so much to get. You get unique stickers you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting your friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges, a ton, including their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. There's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multiplayers for everything that you want to do with your friends. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench, go download it now, free on the Google Play or App Store. Game on with Monopoly Go. All right, Gino, Howie's season never ends, as you said in segment 1. And, of course, he was busy during the draft, and I did check. So he made 8 trades. Okay. That is the most, tied for the most in NFL history through the 3 days of the draft process. Sicko. Unreal. Sicko. 8 trades, 9 draft picks. This guy's got to be absolutely exhausted. Well, Sunday's like, I got to get right back to it because offensive tackle didn't really fall my way. Even the lineman he took on day 3, Gino, that's a center and more of a guard player than a tackle with Keegan and McMahon, brings in a former first-round pick, a top 15 selection, Mekhi Becton, formerly of the New York Jets. Definitely busted out in New York. He was not the guy to be, of course, it was Sam Darnold and then Zach Wilson's protector, Aaron Rodgers. But for what the Eagles need, again, they don't need him to be a starting tackle on either side or even a guard. They just need another depth piece, a potential swing tackle, which they really don't have on the roster. Give Jeff Stoutland that kind of player that had day 1 traits. Like, I'm all for it. For 1 year, $5.5 million. Like, I think that's a great move for a post-draft acquisition.
After drafting Trevor Keegan, who's primarily a guard, and
he's a guard.
Dylan McMahon, who is more likely going to be a center than anything. And
I imagine he's Jurgens' primary backup.
Yeah, he has guard versatility. With Fred Jackson on the roster, you still needed to add a swing tackle. That was
Fred Johnson, right?
Fred Johnson, dude. Fred Jackson, like, it's Buffalo haunts me. That game we were in Buffalo, Fred Jackson ran all over that Eagles defense. It'll never get out of my head.
That was my first Eagles game ever, 2011.
Yep. Fred Johnson, he was the next man up when it came to that position. You don't have Jack Driscoll. A lot of those guys have left.
I think he'd be better than Driscoll, probably, right?
Oh, dude, he's going to be
Stout can do that.
There were snaps when he took snaps against the Eagles where he made Derek Barnett look like a little kid out there, where he just put him into the dirt, play after play after play. If there was any coach to get the best out of somebody at that size with that athleticism, who has somebody very similar at left tackle with a very similar makeup when it comes to frame, build, and athleticism in Jordan Mailata, if I'm the agent of Mekhi Becton, I'm saying you go to Philly for this year. You might play 2 or 3 games in lieu of one of those guys potentially being out. Maybe you get some snaps at guard. I don't think that he would, but hey, you never know with Jeff. Sure. And in 2025, you're probably going to be paid close to $15 million after you get that tape out there where you have refined technique, you have better sets, you have better hand usage, and you are just coached by a better coach. Andre Dillard got paid a bag by the Tennessee Titans. He got picked up again by Green Bay, and he is half the physical player of what Mekhi Becton is. I believe in this signing right now. $5.5 million for a swing tackle? Good business, Howie Roseman. That's good business for a guy like that. He's 25 years old. 25 years old.
Yeah, he's young. And again, they headed into the draft process, Gino, with Matt Hennessy and Fred Johnson as your really only depth pieces on the offensive line. And Fred Johnson has barely played any football. Hennessy, of course, definitely has more experience, but like that's not a lot. Now you bring in, Keegan and McMahon, of course, are day 3 picks, but Stoutland has a pretty good track record with linemen coming in on day 3. Same with Howie. Absolutely. You bring in those 2 and Becton, 3 more pieces. Again, these aren't starters. Like I'm pretty happy now with the way the offensive line works for 2024.
Aaron Wilson also reported that undrafted free agent tackle Gottlieb Ayedze, I believe out of Maryland, was signed for a $250,000 guaranteed contract as an undrafted free agent for the Philadelphia
Eagles. Spend more money on draft picks and undrafted rookies than anybody in the league.
I also believe that Castles, the tight end out of Tennessee that they signed, got a bag close to that number as well. They are willing to pay guys as undrafted free agents.
Heck, they gave Carson Strong all that guaranteed money, and he never even played in the preseason.
And this is the smallest undrafted free agent class that they've had. Howie even said that they only have around 7 guys because they made an emphasis of wanting to take guys off of practice squads last year. And guys like Isaiah Rodgers, who they had made investments on in the past. So it's you're going to see some guys get poached from this roster.
I agree.
That are good football players.
It's a fun team on paper.
It's not a bad problem to have. It's not a bad problem to have because
hey, by the way,
the team building element is going well.
They're working out John Ross. You see that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why you bring in a 7-year veteran to your rookie minicamp when you can see other guys. But you never know. Philadelphia is a wild place.
Can he still run in a straight line at a 4.22?
We'll see.
That's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Eagles. Gino and I, we have a lot of stuff to still talk about regarding this draft class all week long. Still, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, even after the draft. Subscribe on all platforms and on YouTube as well. Thanks so much again for making us your first listen each and every day. For Gino Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off as always. Thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.